I'm very pleased to invite our next speaker up, Dr. Zoe Plakias, who's in our department, the Department of Agricultural, Environmental Development, and Economics. Takes a PhD to say that full department name. Zoe's been with us now for 4 years, 3 years, 4 years, 3 years. She is a graduate of UC Davis with a PhD and got her undergraduate degree from Western Washington. I guess I would probably say that she's probably from somewhere out there on the West Coast. That'd be my guess, but not. She'll let us know more about that. Anyways, I don't want to take any more of her time. Zoe, I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
Down to my level. Great. So thank you, Brent. It's a pleasure to be here today and speaking to all of you. So I actually grew up in Massachusetts, in the western rural part of the state. It does exist for those of you who have not been there. Rolling hills and small farms and such. Can everyone hear me through this? Okay. Great. So what that means is that the last 3 years have been my first 3 years in the Midwest. Before that, I was bi-coastal. So I'm coming to you as a bi-coastal millennial, which you may say, oh no, and I get that. But I do think that perspective is valuable because there are more of us moving to this area, moving to Columbus, moving to Ohio, maybe to your areas, or coming back to those areas from the places that I have lived. And so I want to, bring that perspective and share that perspective to you as someone who's kind of a recent transplant to Ohio. And I'm not going to be able to tell the stories about the ballpark opening and all that you've heard already. But I'll try to share some of my experiences from some other places and how they could be adapted, not adopted, to what's going on in Ohio. So first, why food and agriculture? I know we have some of our folks who look at agriculture who are in kind of primarily agricultural counties might be here today. We also have a wider swath of folks who might not be so involved in what's going on in our agricultural economy in Ohio. So I just want to mention kind of two things that are really unique and important to Ohio agriculture and to the food economy more broadly. And I'm going to be kind of zooming out to think about the food system more broadly because I think that's an important way to think about our food and agricultural economy here. So first, agriculture remains an important activity in a number of rural Ohio communities. It's not as important as it was, just as agriculture is not as important as it was in most places in the United States, right, where we've just seen a movement out of agriculture and into urban areas. So this is something that is a very common transition that we see as economies develop over time. Our state also there's this rich agricultural tradition, right? You can't spell agriculture without culture, right? So that is a part of our rural communities, and it's important to folks that remain there. And our state also contains or is proximate, of course, to many urban centers of the U.S. And the consumers living in them, right? Folks like me who have, I live in South Columbus. I moved here from California, right? So we're here and we're buying your stuff and we're visiting small towns and cities around the state. So I want to talk a little bit about the geography of food and agriculture in Ohio. And the next few slides are thanks to some work that was done by some of my colleagues, including Brent Songen, who's been the moderator today, and Ben Brown, who I'm sure many of you know because he's just out everywhere all the time. I don't know how he does it around the state. And several years ago, we put out a report called Economic Contribution of Food and Agriculture in Ohio, right? So we were looking at how do the different kind of sectors of food and agricultural production and processing and retailing contribute to our Ohio economy as a whole. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that's divided across space because there might be some areas that surprise you. For those of you where it's your area, you're going to say, oh yeah, I knew that. But around the state, there's some interesting kind of characteristics to talk about. So first thing, as some of you know who are in the agriculture space, the agriculture census just came out, the 2017 agricultural census. So we have some new data just in the last couple of weeks. I just want to tell you a little bit about farming first. So the number of farms in Ohio increased from 2012 to 2017. Okay? What we do see is that the number of small farms and the number of large farms increase, the number of medium-sized farms decrease. Okay, this is a trend that we see a lot in agriculture. We call it the missing middle, right, or Agriculture of the middle is that group in the center that's getting squeezed quite a bit, right? The small farms, however, are growing at a faster rate than the large farms, and we do see, although the number of farms increase, the sales of agricultural products decline slightly. So they aren't huge changes, but these are the changes that we're seeing. Now, what's also happened over time is we've become incredibly productive, right, at turning inputs, labor, other types of inputs, right, into agricultural outputs. We're incredibly productive, and that's wonderful, okay? But it also has meant that we might need fewer people to do that work over time. It's meant that we have huge amounts of these crops in our communities, and that can hurt prices, right? So we're seeing some of the effects of that, and Ben Brown and some of my other colleagues spend a lot of time talking about that around the state, and I think we'll continue to this summer. So I encourage you to listen to them as they're around the state about that. But I want to kind of just give that context for where we are in Ohio with food and agriculture. So one of the things that we looked at in this report that we put out was this value added from food and agriculture. So this is one way to measure the importance of food and agriculture in various parts of Ohio, right? And so the value added for a sector is sales minus input costs. So the amount of value that's added by a particular part of the supply chain, okay? So sometimes we'll hear we'll look at total sales numbers and we'll use that as some kind of marker. What's important to think about is if a product is coming through your community at 1 or 2 or 3 stages of the supply chain, what is your community doing to add value to that product, right? That's the value creation, right, is coming from not just that total sales, but taking something, an input, and doing something productive with it, right, relating to some of what Ned was saying. So this is consistent with the measurement of gross state product, right? So this is a nice way for us to think about where we're creating value around the state. So I want to talk about the role of food and agriculture and value added in 2 different ways. One is looking at the state level, and one is looking at the county level. Okay? So we can look at value added by county from these 2 perspectives. Okay, and so if we think about the state level, okay, then what we have is these are where we are creating the most value, right, in the state. When we think about the county level shares of value add, we're saying where are the counties that have the kind of most reliance on agriculture as a part of their economy, right? These are the counties where they might have a large share of their value added in the county is coming from agriculture, but they're still potentially not the largest players in the state, right? So these are 2 important things to think about, and they're distinctly different, right? Because if you're thinking about economic development on a state scale, right, and thinking about developing your food and agricultural economy, you're going to look at those areas where the value added is highest in the state. If you're thinking about this on a county or a regional level, you need to be thinking about, you know, what is agriculture and food processing as a share of our county's value added, okay? So it's important to distinguish those 2. So here are some maps. I'm going to go through some of these. And what I've done here is I have the top 5 counties, okay? And this is as a share of state value added, okay? So this is their rank, okay? This is value added from agricultural production, okay? And the sectors in parentheses are the sectors within that county that are driving that number, not entirely, right, but are the highest, okay, in that county. So when we look within agricultural production, right, we have a number of kind of subsectors, okay? So what we see is that when we look at value added, right, we have these service sectors, right, that are very important. Inputs, we have machinery, we have various types of folks that are supporting our farm sector, and we see that we have some livestock-based products here, right? We have poultry and egg production, dairy and milk production. Ben's told me that he expects, so this is dated, this is a couple years old, 2015. Ben said he expects Wayne County to drop out because of the decrease in dairy processing that we might be seeing there. I see some nodding heads here. Okay, so this just to tell you about these numbers, we're hoping to have new numbers out this summer to update these a little bit. So look for that Ben's website, he puts together county profiles, and you can also, I think, get those from your extension agents in your counties to understand this from a county perspective. Okay, so what we see when we're looking at the state, these are our big areas, right? We see some central parts of the state, right, where we see services to be a big deal. We see that dairy processing, and then again, we see over in the western part of the state where we see a lot of that agriculture. We see these two value-added areas. Now, when we look at counties, okay, we see some of the same, but we see it's all moved over to the western part of the state, right? So these are the counties where agriculture is the largest share of their county value added, right? So if you're looking at a local perspective, these are the places that you want to be thinking about. This is something that's unique and special and important in these areas. And again, we see the same sectors are coming out as high in value added. Now we move to food and ag processing. Okay, this was interesting to me and interesting to some of us in our department who've looked at these data. Of course, we see this is urban areas, right? We're seeing Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus, and we're seeing this really dominated by beverage processing, right? We're seeing that is the dominant industry here. So, right, the various Anheuser-Busch, right? We have the various beer processing, for example, and we have other food processing. I think Stark County is the Smucker's processing. So we see some big food processors that are playing a role here. Now, interestingly, so that's the state, and that shouldn't be surprising to any of us, but when we look at the county level, again, right, what we see that this is a little bit more scattered, right? So this, I think, is interesting to look at. Holmes County pops up for wood, paper, and furniture, so we're trying to kind of be broad in our in looking at some of this. But again, we see now when we look at counties, we see much more diversity of who is processing food, right? It's not centered around our urban areas. So if these are some of your counties, right, you are in the state among the top folks in processing, right, in terms of the reliance on processing. Okay, so that's something that's unique about the character of your area relative to other parts of the state. And when we look, I haven't given the ranges of percentages, but we see in a lot of these some really wide ranges of how much processing we see in counties in the highest and the lowest. Okay, so we see anywhere from 0.5% of that value of the value added in the county is coming from processing all the way to something like 16, right? So we see large ranges. A lot of diversity in Ohio on this front. And just to highlight this also, when we did our report, something that was interesting was we actually, using some Bureau of Labor Statistics data, I think Brent put this together, we actually saw that there's been a slowdown in productivity in the food and agricultural and the wood sector. And we have not explored that yet, but we found it very interesting. We found it surprising. Maybe some of you have anecdotal information in your communities where you've seen some of that. Given the amount that we focus on agriculture in the state, I think it's interesting to think about, if we broaden this out and think about food processing, agricultural processing, are we thinking expansively about what our agricultural and food economy looks like? Then when we get to wholesale retail, so this doesn't include bars and restaurants. Again, percentage of state, no surprise here, we see the urban areas coming out on top here, okay? Just in terms of the value added. But again, once we look at this around the state, we see other areas popping up, right? When we look at this, the percentage of county. Now this has very little variability. Why? Because every area's got to have a grocery store of some kind, right? We do have food deserts in Ohio. We'll talk about that in a second, right? But we do have this small share of our economy that's always going to be made up by food, retailing, and wholesaling, because we're getting folks to the people in these areas who want to consume it, right? Okay, so I just wanted to kind of give an idea of the geography. Some of that might have surprised you if you're not from some of these areas. And then the other thing I want to talk about is food security, right? Because we talk a lot about food production, and we're thinking about economic development. I just want to say a little something about, the folks who are in need in Ohio. And food security is the household level economic condition of limited or uncertain access to adequate food. So why is it important? Well, aside from the moral implications, which I hope we all can agree on, right? Food insecurity, right, could prevent individuals from being productive members of their local communities, right? So as we're thinking about doing all of these great activities that Ned was suggesting, we need to think about, are people able to participate in that, or are they just wondering how they're going to get enough food for the day or the week? And it suggests that the food system that we have, although we are very good at producing food in the state of Ohio, agricultural products and food products, suggests our food system is not fully serving our communities. So as we're thinking about, again, how to build these places into nice places to live, whatever that means, I also cannot define it, right, that we need to think about these folks. So just a little map here, there's a great Feeding America, which is of course kind of an umbrella for a lot of food banks around the country, worked with some agricultural economists, and they have some really great data that's just out this year around food insecurity at the county level nationally. So if you're interested in exploring this at your local level, I highly suggest that you dig into it. It looks at adult and child food insecurity. So what we see here is Appalachian Ohio. Okay, we see some rural areas. We also see some urban areas. So getting to Ned's point about the issues that are facing our communities in the other Ohio and the forgotten Ohio, right? We see that right here, right? We see that we have Athens County, right, is our highest, nearly 20% of individuals in Athens County are in food insecure households.
Well, that's because they're wanting food contracts at the university.
Okay.
That was a joke.
You might know more than that in Athens County than I do. I'm sure you do, so. Okay, that's good. All right, so I haven't dug into this. That may or may not be a joke from Ned, but I think we need to keep this in mind, right? As we're thinking about our communities, do our folks in our communities have even the ability to engage, or are they just focus on meeting their basic needs, right? Okay, so where am I going to go from here? Now, one of my areas of research is local and regional food systems. So certainly this is not a huge part, and I'll tell you the numbers of our entire food and agricultural economy, but it's something that folks look to, especially in some of our rural areas, but also in urban areas, as they're thinking about creative placemaking and anchor institutions and attracting people. And so something I think is relevant to our discussion today, and Ned did a really great intro for me for the last 40 minutes, and I'll try to connect back to what he said. So why local? Some of you may focus on purchasing some of your expenditures locally, but consumers see local and direct purchasing, right, as a way to get fresher, better tasting food, eat healthier, support their community, and acquire food from a source that they trust. Now, I'm not saying as an economist that we have shown that eating local does all of these things, right? But this is the perception, and that's important. This is what people are looking for. This is why people are engaging in their local food systems, right? And at the bottom, the reason that I highlighted trust is because I think this is really the key, right? We're hearing this in a lot of different situations that folks have lost trust in the food system, right? They are, and we hear this, the big bad corporation kind of narrative in a broader area than just in food and agriculture, right? That folks are do not trust the businesses that they're purchasing from to make decisions that are in their best interest or that meet their values, right? And increasingly, millennial consumers like me, we are interested in fair, sustainable, healthy, right? We can think of all of these adjectives to describe our food. Can we ensure that the businesses that we're purchasing from are providing that, right? That's the question. When you go to a farmer's market, even if you don't ask the question, you know where those folks live, right? If something goes wrong, if you see something that doesn't look okay, you can say, hey, Lucy, Joe, what happened? This isn't okay with me. You can have that conversation, right? And so even if people don't have that conversation, the ability to have it creates this environment of trust, right? Which I think, Ned really emphasized trust and honesty as being a key part of this placemaking. So I want to emphasize trust because I think it's important as we think about the role of local and regional food systems to consider, well, if people really want trust, that's broader than just those systems, right? And I think that we need to think about the role of trust more moving forward if we're, again, playing the long game, as I think everybody wants to do here. Another thing to think about is local food as an amenity, right? And when Ned and I first met about talking about this day today, we talked about how there's this kind of continuum, and I hope it's okay if I talk about this, Ned, I'm giving you credit here. Okay, that there's this continuum from, just kind of meeting basic needs and just the most kind of basic foods all the way to this kind of entertainment version of food, right? And my husband, when we lived in Davis, California, which is known nationally for its farmers market, he used to call the farmers market the Davis Dog and Baby Show, right? Because it was a place for people to gather, right? More than it was even a place for people to buy food. As we look generationally, millennials still like to go to the grocery store. Like, they haven't entirely given up and shop at Amazon and the farmers market only, right? We overstate some of these trends, right, related to consumption. Folks still, want to be able to go to the grocery store and get many of the things that they need. But increasingly, people are seeing these places like farmers markets as these places as a third space, right, as another place to engage in their communities, right? And so that's what we see communities doing, is using that as a gathering place. Also, sales from food away from home have increased over time, and we see that we have sales from various non-sit-down, I guess I'm playing out the term now, but non-sit-down restaurants, right, where you have some kind of like low service kind of restaurant, like a counter service. Food trucks are all the rage right now, right? So we're seeing millennials increasingly are interested in some of those other kind of lower levels of service for their food away from home. Okay, so local and direct sales. Now, how we have some brand new numbers from the agricultural census. This is for 2017. So the sales of $198 million in 2017, which was through direct sales. Okay, so this is about 2% of Ohio farm sales. So again, it's a drop in the bucket. I think that's about what it is nationally too, in terms of just the share of total agricultural sales. And 40% of these sales are directly to consumers in Ohio. So that's your farmers market, your CSA, which is community supported agriculture, right? Roadside stands, things like that. So that's 40% of that. When we think about direct-to-consumer sales, which is often where we go immediately in our minds when we think local, right? We think of those face-to-face interactions. We saw from 2007 to 2012 that there was a decline in the number of farmers selling directly to consumers and a decline in the revenue per farm from selling directly to consumers. So it seemed like that was cooling a little bit. These new numbers, and this is actually a typo, the trend changed from 2012 to 2017. So in the last 5 years of this ag census that we just got the data for, we see that there continues to be a decline in the number of farmers selling directly to consumers, a small decline, but there is a huge increase percentage-wise in average revenue per farm selling directly to consumers. We saw the average go up in Ohio from $7,050 to $12,955. That's a huge increase, right? So these are small numbers, right? These aren't the big numbers that are driving kind of the value added in our economy that I was talking about earlier. But they are showing that this is really a hot area for Ohio, the increases that we're seeing. So then where is the other 60% of this food going, though, if it's not going directly to consumers? Well, it's going to institutions. It's going to places like Ohio State, which is committed to source 40% of its food locally and sustainably by 2025. And the definition of that, I could not tell you exactly. They've been working on it for a long time. Retailers, right? We see grocery stores, restaurants, caterers are all purchasing, and we see these intermediaries. Food hubs, the Ohio West Virginia Food Hub Network is based out of the South Centers at Piketon, and they are helping folks across those 2 states to start food hubs. So these are intermediaries that are branding and selling locally. And we have, because of this interest in local, we are seeing a number of intermediaries outside of that kind of food hub space, right? Other types of distributors or buyers who are purchasing food and branding it locally, right, so that they can take advantage of that interest by consumers. So what are the impacts of all this, right? Ultimately, we want to understand how does this affect our communities. So some recent work, a number of folks contributed to this. It was published by the Federal Reserve, and I can provide a link later on the website. Using economic impact analysis found so statistically insignificant gains, again being depressing in the hypothesis testing. I see men smiling over there. Or some positive gains, small positive gains for regions. Okay, why so small, right? We hear this narrative about food. Well, really, my kind of thoughts here is this is really about opportunity costs, right? When we are investing in our local food systems, it really matters where the resources came from, what they were doing before, right? So key resources in local food systems are people, right, and land, among other things. And if they were taken out of other productive activities to move into local food systems, then we're not creating a whole lot of new value, right? We're just shifting that value to another sector, right? So when we look at that, just from a kind of economic standpoint, we have to consider, what value is this adding? So if we were thinking, well, hey, we want to be able to add value with this, not just get this small positive gain, we need to think about in communities, what are the underutilized resources, right? Is there land that's not being used? We talked a little bit about land banks, right? Is there land that's not being used for productive purposes? Are there people who are having a difficult time getting jobs? Are they previously incarcerated? Are they recovering from addiction, right? Is there some group that is not fully engaged in our workforce? Can we employ those underutilized resources and engage them in our food system investments, right? That's where we're going to see the biggest gains rather than just shifting people and land from other productive activities. Some additional impacts that I want to talk about. Obviously, profitability is going to be important for the sustainability of these operations. Okay, and marketing directly and locally often requires farmers to take on more marketing costs than marketing through traditional channels, right? So we often, one of the colloquial things we hear is that, well, farmers are getting a larger share of the food dollar if they market directly. Well, yes, but they're also spending a larger share of the food dollar on all of their inputs and their time, right? So marketing costs really vary widely. That's the evidence, and we see that the profitability is higher for smaller scales of production. When we get to larger scales, it's those marketing costs really add up. That should be very intuitive to us, and that there is evidence that it's possible to also overinvest in these systems. Okay, so if we're so focused on local foods that you actually create competition in your community with local branding, you can't simply keep expanding. Local is a key part of it. So you can oversaturate by having too much entry of businesses that are all focused in this local food space. So that's something we have to be cognizant of because of the limited space in these areas. Almost done. We also have some less tangible impacts, and I think these really relate to what Ned was talking about, the nice place to be and placemaking, and some of the things that as economists that we have a very difficult time putting our finger on. We would like to be able to quantify them to give some dollar value because we like to put everything in that common unit of currency, but it's very difficult to do that. And I would say some of our colleagues in other fields are really trying to understand this in different ways that might be more suited to the task. But these less tangible impacts are community engagement, education of urban consumers, which we know is very important, especially in a state where we have this rural and urban group, and building entrepreneurial capacity, which of course is incredibly important for us to be able to develop and to get people invested in the way that I think Ned was talking about. Okay, so a few last slides just about the future of local food systems. So one question, if you're investing in these systems and you're playing the long game, is will interest in local last, right? This is actually a fairly new phenomenon that we've seen, this premium for local food. And as I said earlier, the reason I emphasize trust is that local preferences are really based on concerns about trust. So my view on this is that as larger food companies work to increase consumer trust, right, through third-party certifications, other kinds of commitments that they make to their workers related to environmental concerns, that the role of the local food as their most trusted resource could decrease, right? So this is something that we need to keep in mind. And so thinking ahead, I would encourage you, if you're interested in investing in this space in your community, to think about how will your investments fare as tastes and preferences of consumers change, right? How will your community be resilient to changes if local branding is not the be all end all? How can you maintain trust and engagement when that is no longer as much of a fad? And finally, I want to say something about food insecurity, because I talked about that earlier, and I think it's so important. And it's local food investments are often used as this one of the kind of taglines is, oh, we'll be able to provide food to our poorest, neediest folks, and not necessarily, right? This is possible, but it's not just going to come naturally from your investments in this area. So affluent consumers are willing to pay a premium for local. But many food insecure households may not be able to. There are increasingly government programs to help support this, but actually, interestingly, we've seen some research recently that's saying that in food deserts, right, areas where we thought that we were seeing food insecurity because people didn't have access to food and it was just a physical issue. We're actually seeing that part of the food insecurity is coming from differences in demand, right? That across our different communities, we see that we don't have maybe the preferences for fresh kale that my millennial colleagues at OSU do in maybe some of our inner city neighborhoods, right? We don't see those same preferences, okay? And that's not a judgment, but something that we have to consider as we think about, what are the ways that we can address food insecurity. So if this is an issue that your community is facing, then it's important to carefully consider the local food investments in the context of whatever the community is that you are interested to support, who's food insecure, and be communicating with them. Again, coming from the community is the best way you're going to be able to solve this. They're going to be able to tell you what they need. And with that, thank you very much.